Hi, welcome to the video. So today I'm going to talk about and kind of give an overview and comparison. Steve Vai's 10-hour workout he came out with in 1990 and his 30-hour workout that came out in 2004. This book kind of reprints both of them, but they both were originally magazine articles. So I'm also going to teach a section that appeared in both of them. Both of them had the idea of doing thirds, fourths, and fifths inside diatonic scales. So that's the section I'm going to teach. I'm also going to, on the 30-hour workout, they had alternating fifths. So I'm going to kind of talk about that. I'm going to teach to give you more variety. He did them all in G major scale. I'm going to tab them out in thirds in the G Mixolydian, fourths in B Locrian, and fifths in C major. So you have a little bit more variety. I'm also going to do alternating thirds instead of alternating fifths. That way, if you look at both, you can see both the tabbed out version of the thirds and the fifths. Also, if you check up in the corner, I'll link some videos in which I already taught alternating fifths and alternating fourths, so you can then, be able to do any of those intervals alternating. I also created a lick that used thirds and fourths. Thirds and fifths, because I really want to encourage you guys, if you're doing an exercise, the exercise is just to learn new things you can then use in your composing and improvising and writing. So always try and make licks from these scale ideas as soon as you can on it. So here's the lick I created from the thirds and fifths. Okay, and I'll demonstrate that slow when I do the rest of the section on the thirds, fourths, and fifths. Like always, you can download the tab for free on my Patreon page. I don't remember if I said that, and its link is in the description. Okay, let's go and talk about these two workouts. So the 2004 workout was, Guitar World asked him to basically revisit the 10-hour workout idea. And let me just read you what he says about it, because if you're going to do one or the other, I definitely recommend the 10-hour workout. It was actually written by Steve Vai on it, while the original one was taken from an interview by Dave Whitehill. So you can see, if you look at that, it actually says Dave Whitehill down there is who wrote the article, while this one was actually written by Steve Vai. Okay. And this 30-hour one is like twice as long or more. On the reprinted book form, it's 27 pages, while the 10-hour one's only 11 pages, though the originals were only 10 pages and 6 pages when you take out some of the ads and stuff like that. But what he said at the intro of this 30-hour one, in 1990 I sat down with Guitar World for an interview from which my 10-hour guitar workout was extracted. When GW recently asked me to revise the workout, I decided to rewrite the program entirely in order to incorporate more of the wisdom I've gathered over the years. I must have accumulated a lot of wisdom in 14 years, because what I have responded with is my new 30-hour guitar workout compared with its predecessor. This program provides a more complete overview of elements that may help to balance the player's focus and personal goals on the instrument. And I'd say that's totally true. That the 10-hour workout was very much not diversified. The categories on the 30-hour workout, and keep in mind, this wasn't adding just more hours. It really is just a revised 10-hour workout, because the 30-hour workout refers to you do a 10-hour workout 3 days in a row and then you take a day off. So you're not doing a different 10-hour workout each day. It's just a 10-hour workout repeated 3 times. But this included finger exercises for an hour, scales for an hour, chords for an hour, ear training an hour, sight reading an hour, composing and songwriting for an hour, music theory for an hour, and then 3 hours of jamming. The original one was just an hour of finger exercise, hour of scales, hours of chords, then repeat that 3 times. And then what he wrote on the original one, anyway, that's about 9 hours, and that was the first day. So that's a point to make, that the original one wasn't meant as a daily workout. It was meant as a specific workout, like a snapshot of one day they might do. But then he says, the second day I'd do less, go on to other things. I'd devote 3 hours to mechanics, then work on vibrato or take hammer-ons, pull-offs, and flutters, which Dave wrote in parentheses trills, and work on just those for an hour. The principle is in to just focus on one idea and work on it for about an hour and then go on to something else. So this was never meant to be something that you do day in and day out. He was changing his workout every day. And more importantly, I think the reason why, oh, and let me say too, on the 10-hour workout, the way Dave wrote, the 10th hour was what he called sensitivity training, or what Steve called sensitivity training, which was basically trying to create phrases in your mind, like sentences, and then translate those into music and do that over a backing track. But that wasn't really what the 10-hour was meant to be. He said on here, let me see if I can find it. The last hour I always reserve for just soloing and jamming, feeling it, forgetting everything, and just playing. So the 10th hour is supposed to be jamming. I think the reason he then went on, Steve said, I used to do this thing called sensitivity hour. So because in this actual 10-hour workout, like a whole page of it pretty much is that sensitivity hour, I think Dave probably felt the need to make that be the 10th hour, but he said specifically the 10th hour is just him jamming and improvising. So while he might have occasionally throw in the sensitivity hour, it wasn't something that was an always thing. And in the 30-hour workout, he doesn't even mention it, while the jamming becomes 3 hours. So if you are doing the 10-hour one, I'd leave off the sensitivity one. Do that occasionally and have jamming be the last hour. I would just say, in general, on the whole 10-hour idea, though, I really would recommend not going for 10 hours. I mean, it's just really not practical. And he even said, Steve, that it's easier to do when you're younger and have time. But it's not even something he did on a regular basis, I can guarantee, because he did graduate high school. He graduated with good enough grades that he went on to Berkeley right out of high school. So he was clearly going to school, doing homework. And if you're in school 8 hours a day, you don't have another 10 hours to practice after, especially since he said he also was playing with a high school band that was good enough and rehearsed enough that they played gigs out and they had full sets of cover music. So he had to be learning those songs, which back then there wasn't tabs, so he was learning by ear. He had to be rehearsing with the band. They were his friends. He was going to hang out with them. Not to mention eating, sleeping, and everything else. He might have done a 10-hour workout occasionally on weekends, or he maybe did it in the summer on a regular basis, but he wouldn't have had time to do 10 hours on school days either. So don't get hard on yourself, I guess, if you think, well, he did 10 hours, I need to do 10 hours. You don't need to. You just need to be efficient with your practice. And he even said the focus is more important than the number of hours. When I was going to G.I.T, they sent out a prep guide for new students. And I did a video on both these ideas, on the prep guide and on the student handbook. And the preparatory guide was for new students before they start, so they're prepared. And that basically gave a practice regimen of 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. The student handbook, which was given to students once they arrived and were in school, became 6 days a week and 4 hours a day. Again, not 10 hours. And you have players like Paul Gilbert, Frank Gabali, Jeffrey Brad, all these people came out of G.I.T who are as technical at playing as anyone is. My point is, you might occasionally do 10 hours, but that doesn't have to be something you aim for on a daily basis. And you're much more likely to burn out or injure yourself if you do that. And that's why in his 30-hour one, it was 3 days of practice and then a day taken completely off. If you do less than 10 hours, you don't have to take a day completely off. Anyways, let me also make a comment that he was saying he gained more wisdom, and that's why his 30-hour one was better. But I think a lot of it is also that the 10-hour one was a response to a question. Dave, who was doing the interview, specifically said it on this, I'll read it. I asked Steve if his technical development, so he specifically talked about technical development, not overall guitarmanship and stuff and playing, was the result of practicing any kind of specific regimented workout routine. And then it says, after thinking back to his pre-virtuoso years, he said and then he goes into starts to describe it, so I'll go ahead and describe it. But so the point is, he came up with this 10-hour workout basically off the top of his head, with the interviewer recording him and sitting there, staring at him, waiting for an answer. While the 30-hour one, he actually wrote out over a period of, I don't know how many days or weeks. So he actually thought through that, and you can see that's much more balanced, because the 10-hour one was just hour of scales, hour of chords, and hour of finger exercises repeated 3 times, versus the 8 different categories where they put all those original 3 into just an hour each. So another thing, let me get to, and then I'll get right into the teaching the intervals and stuff. And I'll read a little bit more from here. Why I'd say don't get this book. Instead, find the PDFs of the original ones. The 30-hour one seems accurate, but the 10-hour one, he paraphrases and changes what Steve said on this, and they take out all the questions, so you don't know that these are actually answers to questions. In fact, it says right here, to start, Vai presents the general philosophy behind his approach to guitar. And then he goes on to respond, I could tell you, rule of thumb, try to always play clean, or rule of thumb, think melody, but I wouldn't, because I really don't think there are too many rules of thumb if you try to do something. And basically saying that he wants people to innovate and, break rules. But that wasn't his general philosophy. That was actually a response to a question where Dave asked him, do you have any rules of thumb or tips that you want to present? And then he starts saying some of that stuff. And if I read the next section, in here, it really, I think, kind of misrepresents. It says, a rule of thumb I could offer is never take what anybody tells you as gospel. Music is an art form. The actual quote from the original interview is, if I had to give a rule of thumb, totally different than saying a rule of thumb I could offer you. He's saying if I had to give one, it would be never take what anybody tells you as the Bible, like this is what it is, and this is what it should be. And then he said music is art form. So he took all that whole section about, describing what it is. So all through here, they're kind of changing the words to some extent on that. So again, I would kind of not do the book and find the original PDFs. Now, another reason why I would say, in addition to being more balanced and thought through, I would aim for the 30-hour ones. Some of the things in here I really don't agree with, and in the 10-hour one, and from reading the 30-hour one, I don't think Steve would agree with them anymore either. There's this section when Dave asks whether he used other positions for the major scale, and Vai responded, no, I just used to play in that one position. The others were useless to me. The only reason I used those scales was to get the sound of them in my head and get my fingers going. I didn't want to learn scales in a million different positions because I was afraid my playing would become too position orientated. And he's saying this in response to that Vai said that he would take that G major scale and play it in all 12 keys and in 10 different tempos, which to me is ridiculously redundant. You'd be much better off actually playing all the different modes in it. And he did know the modes because he played them all in one of the exercises in G, G Phrygian, G.I.T, G, but he didn't play them in a key. So he was just trying to hear the sound of each of them. But basically, if you're playing the 10 different tempos in 12 different keys, that's 120 times repeating the same scale. In this 30-hour one, he totally changed his opinion. He wasn't afraid of scales anymore, and he loved scales at this point. And said he still thought that one of the main benefits of scales was to learn the sound of them and the feel of them, so you could then use them. But that, of course, that is part of the point of learning scales, in addition to the physical memory of them. He says, learn and play as many scales as you can in every key and position, in 1 octave, 2 octaves, 3 octaves. Start from any note on the low string, then the A string, etc. Make sure you play each scale forward and backward, ascending, descending. And then he went ahead and showed scale fingerings for all the modes. He also showed for blues scale and pentatonic scale. He also talked about 12-tone chromatic scales, synthetic scales, and he talked about how when he used to travel to other countries, he would try and learn the local folk music and then figure out what scales they're using and write music using that. At one point he says, there are numerous scales to choose from, and each has a distinctive sound and color. I have a blast with scale reference books. Some people enjoy a first-class trip to Tahiti, but just give me a good scale and I'm in paradise. So again, love scales now. So if you only read that first 10-hour one, he was kind of avoiding practicing the other modes, and instead one exercise he did then, which is a perfectly fine exercise, but he would do and just try and go from one end of the neck to the other, and do it by ear completely, and try and do a different fingering every time he went. And if he made a mistake, he would start over and do it again until he did it perfect. So it was really a lot of trial and error and just listening for bad notes. Where if instead of doing that same G major 120 times, if he would just practice all the modes in the key and then practice moving through them, it would have been way more efficient. And that's where, again, you wouldn't need the 10 hours. I think a lot of times because he was spending so much time sometimes practicing, he didn't worry about being efficient on it, or didn't know how to be efficient on it. Let's get into the intervals. So basically, I'm going to start off with thirds. So thirds are probably the most important one, and that's also part of why I wanted to do the alternating thirds, because thirds are what chords and arpeggios and a lot of melodies built from. Basically, it's just skipping a note and going up one. So if you're going 1, 2, 3, you can find the third just by going the third note from the one you're starting on. So you don't even have to know that that's a major third. Then when you go to the next note, 1, 2, 3, that's a minor third. As long as you go 3 notes up and stay in your scale, in the key, then you're going to do the correct major or minor third. So the exercise would be just moving through the full scale, playing thirds, and then of course descend and do the same thing. Don't worry about speed, and you can build up speed on. But again, it's more about learning where the shapes are and what the sounds are at first. And then when you put them in licks, that's when you can try and build speed. But there's no real reason to have to blaze through just a series of thirds like that. I mean, you might occasionally play a few thirds in a row, but you're not going to play a whole scale that way. Now, another exercise is the alternating thirds. So on this, basically, if you just picture, if you get lost, just think what 2 of them are, and then take and reverse the second one. Or think of wherever I end, my next note's going to be 1 higher. Even here, ending here, my next note on the reversing one will be here. Then I'm just going to start over here. Oops. And see, there I went back into just doing straight thirds. So you have to be careful that you descend and then ascend, descend, ascend, descend, ascend. Sometimes, if I've been doing one a lot, I might go into the other one. When I was doing the fourths one, I found myself alternating fourths because I recently did a video on alternating instead of doing the straight fourths. But it doesn't matter if you alternate or go straight. You want to do both. So here's the fourths starting in the Locrian position. Now, I wrote down the fingerings I'm using, but some of these I gave options because on this, whether you use a third, a fourth finger, or third and second, or even third and third, it really doesn't matter. I find I tend to use my pinky more on the way descending, and then the way up, a lot of times I reach up with my third finger. So, and some of those that I don't think it really matters, I gave both fingerings as an option. The next one is fifths, and this is where, again, on the 10-hour one, I don't know if the fingerings were Dave's or Steve's, but even if they were Steve's, if he was thinking back to what he had done years earlier, and he even said in the interview, or not, in the 30-hour one, I think it was, that he doesn't always practice these things anymore. Of course, he's too busy writing music and touring and doing other things. Same thing, some of these I haven't practiced for a while. So when I did the fifths, the first way I did it was going first third and then second fourth. Then when I played it a few more times, I started just rolling that second finger and going. So the fingering you do first might not always be the one that in the end you think is most efficient once you play through it a few times. So always, even if you see someone good playing the exercise, take it with a grain of salt that if they really drilled on it, they might not play it that same way on it. But just a lot of times when I'm improvising, I'll do a fingering one way, but if I have to do it as a lick, I might change it, like for a video or something, just because maybe I rolled on my pinky when I was improvising, but then I needed to do a bunch of reps for a video, and my pinky gets tired, so I end up in the video doing the third finger or something like that. And that's something he made a point of in here a lot, kind of like with the rule of thumb of you have to be yourself. That listen to other people, learn from other people, but still kind of take everything with a grain of salt and try and don't do something just because someone else said, unless it makes sense. My feeling is apply logic to it. If there's a reason to do something, then do it. If it's the most efficient way, this is probably the best way to do it on the situation. Let me go ahead and play through that lick slow too, so you can kind of see what I'm doing with that. So basically, I'm playing mostly in the key of C major, though it goes out. So I'm starting here, do the third, my third coming back, then I alternate a third, come forward, do another third. Okay, I'm doing like a pentatonic there, and then I go outside key here, do a major third, then followed by fifth, and then another major third. Then we shift forward. Okay, and that was that. So at the end it goes kind of out. When I started writing the lick, I was just going to do it in thirds, but then I got about halfway through and it's like, yeah, I kind of wanted to put in some of those fifths and stuff, so it became a thirds and fifths exercise, or lick. So if you are interested in, I wasn't sure which one I was going to do originally. I was originally going to do the linear exercises, which are the ones that kind of go in different combinations on a single string, or ones that go across the strings in some of the same patterns. If you want to see a video on that, I already memorized all that because I was considering using it for this, but I decided to use the intervals because I think those are more important to your playing. The other ones are good as exercises, but they don't translate as well to actual improvising. Please like, subscribe, comment, any of that stuff, especially if you want me to do that linear and angular one. Leave a comment below, and I'll definitely do that if you guys are interested. Okay, anyways, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.